Lightning, coming in for a fly past at about 200 feet. And it'll be performing a 6G pitch up into an overbank.
Arriva già in volo, arriva già in volo. F35, un UFO.
Or possibly not. Possibly the cloud base might be restricting that. Yeah, I think the cloud base is still around about 2,000 feet. He's probably requiring about 3,500 feet to complete that vertical maneuver. It was back in 2018 that number 617 Squadron, the famous Dam Busters, became the first frontline British F-35B unit when its first 4 aircraft arrived at Marham. Weapon systems generally carried internally in the aircraft to preserve its stealth characteristics. Yes, it can carry 4 medium-range air-to-air missiles internally, or a combination of 2 missiles and a pair of Paveway 4 500-pound precision-guided bombs. Now what we should be seeing next is the aircraft turning back in down the runway centre line, and when it gets to display centre, the F-35B will initiate what's known as a downrange travel stop. And this is a manoeuvre that's used in dogfighting to arrest the aircraft's forward motion in an attempt to flush a hostile aeroplane out in front.
Ricovero. Papi, vai, spostati. And next up should be the slow speed, high angle of attack pass, coming down to a speed of around 105 to 120 knots and at a 33-degree angle of attack. And the pilot here will be modulating the pitch and the power inputs to keep the aeroplane level at slow speed and at that high alpha. So the F-35 force still being built in terms of pilots and ground crew, and indeed airframe numbers increasing, but nevertheless still very much in demand. In February this year they deployed on board HMS Prince of Wales on exercise Steadfast Defender from RAF Marham, and many more deployments on the calendar for this very busy squadron. All the F-35 squadrons are joint RAF and Royal Navy. And only this past week, the first mission has been flown by all 809 Naval Air Squadron personnel. That's the Royal Navy squadron that's so far formed up on the F-35B. With the Harrier that we saw earlier will
come into play because the pilot is going to be turning downwind to get ready for a rolling vertical landing. And this is the sort of landing that you conduct at an expeditionary site out in the field, for example, a road or a short or damaged runway where you want to get to a stop as quickly as possible. The pilot therefore will be targeting a specific flight path angle and a precise touchdown point at a defined ground speed which they base on the stopping distance that's required on that runway, and of course taking into account the aircraft's gross weight. And once the F-35B is on the deck, the pilot will do what the community around the F-35 calls a trundle short takeoff. This wasn't something I'd heard of before, something I've never heard of. And they said this is used when there's no concrete and you need as short a takeoff distance as possible. So we'll see the pilot bring the engine up to 34% thrust and release the brakes. And at a certain point he'll select the throttle to military power and rotate when the engine responds. And it means the F-35B can take off in as little as 460 feet. And this is the only public air show this year where I think we'll see this being performed, because I think at all the other venues the aircraft is flying at in a public display as opposed to, say, Families Day events, the runway isn't suitable for this to be done.
Absolutely, and that was absolutely the case at Cosford.
Guarda cosa fa. Ah, ci sembra quattro posti. Aspetta, torna su verticale. Vai sulla sedia, lì decolla verticale. Ma scusa, non conviene andare con le quattro alla mano.
Il tutorial, il traghetto è con un tappo, si parte lì.
E parte verticale.
Vediamo.
Rolls-Royce lift system on the F-35B model really coming into play. That's key to this aircraft's STOVL, short takeoff vertical landing capabilities. Fully 29,000 shaft horsepower transferred from the main Pratt & Whitney F135 engine to the lift fan element by a drive shaft and clutch, and a thrust vectoring nozzle that you, I'm sure, saw in action, some of you, at the rear of the aircraft there, moves to provide propulsion for forward flight or lift, and the lift fan, which is just after the cockpit section, is used in vertical flight. And you've also got on each wing a roll post nozzle to provide roll control and maintain lateral stability, which they do using bypass air from the F135 engine. And this all means also that this aircraft can operate in very, very strong winds. And we'll see the lift system and lift fan perhaps to even better effect now as the aircraft comes into the hover. Having entered the hover, we'll see the aircraft directly facing the crowd line, and it'll be flown sideways along the runway centre line prior to accelerating out of the hover and back into conventional flight.
Qual è la versione? Io di quelli lì ne ho visti venti. Uno di presente, però poi l'ho visto quando ero piccolo, si vedeva e poi un'altra volta che l'ho visto. E quando ho fatto una pettola simile a quella. No, 10 anni, non vedi manco veramente. No.
As far as the carrier capability of this aircraft for the Royal Navy is concerned, operational F-35Bs from number 617 Squadron worked from HMS Queen Elizabeth for the first time in June 2020, and the following year came the first carrier strike group deployment with the new carrier, and this aircraft's first use on operations against Daesh or Islamic State over Iraq and Syria. They've since been flown on long-range missions as part of Britain's and the wider NATO response to the Ukraine conflict, integrating with Typhoons and other assets. Latest deliveries, Manners was talking earlier about how the fleet has still been building up in terms of numbers of aeroplanes. They're now up to 34. The most recent deliveries, I believe, were in March, and we're due to attain full operational capability with the F-35B next year, by which time the 48th aircraft will have been delivered, and HMS Prince of Wales will be fully operational as the second carrier.
Cleared to carry the Meteor air-to-air missile, the Advanced Medium-Range Air-to-Air Missile, which is radar guided by the AN/APG-81 Advanced Radar, and the Advanced Short-Range Air-to-Air Missile, which is a infrared missile. Also, the Paveway 4 at the moment completes its suite of air-to-surface weapons. Advanced infrared search and track, full countermeasures, and many other systems complete a very, very comprehensive weapons system suite on this F-35B.
And it's coming in for what we believe will be a final pass.
L'ultimo passaggio a manetta. Guardalo, 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 guardalo.
concerns there whatsoever about the cloud base as he's climbing up to flight level